Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, whether you're watching or listening. It is great to be back here as part of PitchCon again and raising money for ALS. So, as Nick mentioned, we are talking about sleepers and busts in this hour, and specifically about relievers. So we've got two of the most knowledgeable fantasy experts in the industry on relievers, first of which being Rick Graham. Hi, Rick. Been on the panel with you before. How's it going?
Good, Eric. I'm happy to be back. This is obviously a great cause, raising money for ALS. Happy to be back. Happy to talk about relievers and, start to it's end of January. So it's, that time of year to start looking into sleepers and busts. Yeah.
Getting to be that time. And then also with us, 2016 FSWA Fantasy Baseball Writer of the Year, the first time on a panel with me, Ray Murphy. How's it going?
Good to talk to you, Eric. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, this is going to be super fun. Hey, Rick, are you still like 2 miles away from me as we discovered back in the fall?
Yeah, I was going to say, I could have just came over. We could have done the show together. Yeah.
We totally could have done that. Yeah.
All right.
Where are y'all calling in from?
We're both in Massachusetts. When I was doing the mailing list for First Pitch Arizona to make sure we were, like everybody got their forecasters and stuff afterwards, I got Rick's address and I'm like, dude, you're literally the next town over. Like we could have been on the same flight to Arizona, all that stuff. We could have done this in the same room. It would have been, would have been fun. You could come over too, Eric. We would have made a room for you. It would have been fun.
Yeah, a little further for me. I'm in Alexandria right now, just outside of DC. So not too far though. Not too far.
I guess this makes us a Amtrak panel then, right?
Yeah, all on the Northeast Corridor. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So for those of you who might be listening in who can't see that handy little ticker on the bottom to tell you exactly what this is, we're going to be talking about sleepers and busts regarding relievers. So we're going to be throwing out some guys whose names we like in terms of drafts, in terms of where they're going right now, which is obviously, especially with relievers, very, very fluid at this point in time. The draft data that we have is not necessarily correlated to the data that we're going to be getting about different types of leagues that are going to be drafting later. So I will be mentioning some like ADP related figures, but just keep that in mind a little bit later. And later, we're also going to be talking about busts, guys that we don't like as much in regarding their ADP. And then we will also have time right at the end to talk about some guys that we might disagree on. So we're going to each throw out some names here, and I like to start out with the positive. I like to start out with some things that we agree on. And there was one name that showed up on both of your sleeper lists, and that was Tanner Scott. So let me toss it to Rick first, and I'll have you both comment on him, though. Why do we like Tanner Scott this year?
Yeah, I feel like it's been, years of him kind of teasing us with his upside, and the issue with him was always his walk rate. He was always able to miss bats at a high rate, but he was always having plus 10 walk rates. And, he was finally able to get it down to 7.8% last year. And not only just the walk rate came down, but the huge difference, I think, was the first pitch strikes for him. In 2022, he was at 54.7%, and he raised that to 69.8% last year. And it just, kind of shows you how much like the wonder of, getting ahead early in the count. Obviously, that's, a big difference maker for him. And, maybe hitters, catch on to that this year and they're a little bit more aggressive earlier in the count. But I don't really have any concern for the walk rate to plummet or to elevate, I guess, again. And outside of the walk rate, he was still top 10 in amongst relievers in, xWOBA, xFIP, CSW, PLV. He was doing everything he was doing, prior to last year, but now the walk rate came down and that helped, bring his ratios down as well. So, he's been, I think, like the 16th closer off the board recently. So I think there's great value in him. I think he's, a top 10 closer right now. And yeah, where he's going, it presents great value.
Yeah, he is going around RP16 right now. So, Ray, do you have any concerns about the walk rate, or maybe even AJ Puck, who's still around?
Yeah, it's interesting. Not as much concern about the walk rate, although I will say it's an interesting path that he got to discovering that control, in that he's not one of these pitch mix change darlings. He's mostly been two-pitch pitcher all along, and it really seems like the growth in control last year was, hey, dude, you don't have to nibble. You actually can beat batters in the strike zone. And like he did that, and he did it more as the year went on, his walk rate went down to, I think it was 5% in the second half, which is, just, sterling. It got to the point where he, seemed completely convinced that, nope, I'm just going to throw my fastball and slider both in the zone and no one's going to do anything with it. And it's going to be great. The good news is, this isn't some, Yu Darvish situation where he's got to, find the magical, sweet spot of some 5-pitch mix to, create some stew that leads to, him sustaining that control. We know he's coming back to camp with the fastball and slider again, right? This shouldn't be a problem. The control should be sticky for that reason. It's funny because I was looking at, Greg Jewett at Reliever Recon actually had a big write-up on Scott last weekend, and I was very interested in reading it because Greg's, like Rick, a bullpen whisperer. And kind of the worst thing that Greg could say about Tanner Scott was, yeah, he might get traded during the season, and then you don't know if he'll be a closer. On the one hand, fair concern. On the other hand, maybe this is just a bias of mine, but if that's the worst thing you can say about the guy, I'm in. If I'll wear it if he's setting up for the Dodgers come August 2nd. That's fine. And if he knocks, 22 saves with the Marlins and then he goes poof on me on August 2nd, you know what? I will consider that a good return on, or at least good process on my draft pick at this time of year, as opposed to, somebody else who we might talk about later who I've got concerns about the skills or the control or the home ballpark or any of those things. If the worst thing we can say about Tanner Scott is, I don't know if he's going to get 6 months in Miami, I'll deal.
Yeah, in a volatile situation with like relievers, it's tough to draft for August, right? You kind of draft for
I
this.
got enough to think about in the offseason here. Exactly.
So I did want to bring up AJ Puck at least. While healthy, he was really good, and he's not had the past command problems that Tanner Scott has had. Are either of you concerned at all about a possible closer sharing situation? AJ Puck surpassing Tanner Scott? Is this a guy that we should be monitoring?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair concern. Puck was one of the best relievers going into July last year, and then things kind of imploded on him. He had really, really bad luck in July, but he's still a good reliever. I was more interested in seeing if they were going to add any sort of right-handed option because their best relievers are all left-handed. Anthony Bender's coming back, but I still think Scott. He starts the season as the closer, and they do have Puck. There's going to have Puck, stretch out in spring. Maybe he ends up being a starter. I doubt he ends up in the rotation, but there's still, I think the potential volatility of Puck's role might even give Scott more of a reason to draft him this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't read the stretching him out to start as it's likely that he's actually going to make it to opening day in that role. But I do think that there's a possibility that they try to turn him into more than just a one-inning left-handed reliever, and that he's potentially a multi-inning relief weapon. Hopefully, back to our primary topic here, in front of Scott. I don't think you would stretch him out, and I don't think you would spend March stretching out Puck with the intent that even by May or June you expect him to be your ninth inning guy. Even for an organization that is sometimes as bewildering as the Marlins, that seems particularly 4D chess.
Yeah, even without Sandy Alcantara, you still look at this rotation and you see there's still some potential there. So yeah, probably a bigger need for multi-inning relievers there, especially not a big need for another big back of the bullpen lefty reliever. They've already kind of got that. So
right.
Maybe they're just trying to stretch him into a different role beyond what they already have.
I think that makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to some other guys that we like. And I threw out the first name. Let's throw it to Ray for the second name. Who's another guy that you think is a sleeper this year?
It's good we started talking about multi-inning relievers because it's a nice segue into Mason Miller with Oakland, who I think is in a situation where things could break pretty well for him. They've said he's going to relieve this year, even though, long-term may still project as a starter, but for workload reasons, they're going to put him in the bullpen. But they're going to put him there potentially in a multi-inning role. That's where he worked last year. And We know this stuff is electric. It's a 98 plus mile an hour fastball. We know there are significant durability concerns there, which is why they're going to try to kind of protect him in the bullpen. The swing strike rate actually wasn't overpowering, an 11 plus % swing strike rate for that 98 plus mile an hour fastball wasn't super exciting in this day and age. But I kind of think he flies under the radar, less about his skills and more about the Oakland team context, which admittedly is terrible. But doesn't mean it's a total wasteland for saves. They had, I think, 29 team saves last year. Trevor May picked up 21 of them, if I'm not mistaken. But it's interesting, the idea of Miller as a right-handed potential multi-inning weapon seems to me like it lends itself to closing in Oakland in a way it wouldn't on some other teams that are going to generate more regular save ops. And other managers worry about, I don't want to blow out my closer for 2 innings tonight because I might need him tomorrow. I don't think Mark Kotsay has to worry about that. Mark Kotsay is going to be like, this guy hasn't pitched in 4 days. We got to lead in the 7th. Go. And tomorrow we're probably 9-1 in the 7th anyway. So I think it actually is. I could see Miller, best case scenario, ending up with a profile of a closer that you don't really see, where he gets 20, 25 saves, most of them more than 1 inning, and, coming once or twice a week, because that's when the save offs present themselves. So I don't know. It's interesting if they decide to go that way. I like the arm a lot. I can talk myself out of the team context concerns as I just did. I guess I'll be watching for some guidance in March about them tipping their hand about how they might or might not want to use Miller in the way I'm describing.
Yeah, as of right now, you don't have to give up that much draft capital for him.
100%.
So as far as like comparing the arms that you can get at the pick that you're going to get Miller, he kind of stands out as an arm that you can get past, in the very late rounds of a 12 team, if he gets drafted in a 12 team, and then the later rounds of a 15 team, as it's looking right now. Compare the arms that you get there. He's pretty good. But as you mentioned, the major injury concern. So, Rick, are you as high on Mason Miller, or are you looking at other guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially where his draft stock is right now, it makes a ton of sense to take a flyer on him, because you look at the rest of the bullpen. I mean, Lucas Erceg's is kind of interesting, but not to the point where, I mean, Mason Miller's got the best skills, I believe, out of that whole bullpen. I don't know if it's even that close. So if you're, so I like to go towards the higher upside options. So Miller, the health concerns are for real, but I like what Ray said about, Oakland's probably going to only need like a closer for, maybe twice a week. So you can, you can still get multiple innings out of him and get saves if they were to, if they have a lead in the 7th inning, let's give Mason Miller the last 3 innings, and that could be the way that they use him this year. And if that's the case, and that's, even if it's only 20 something saves where you're drafting him, that's a huge profit right there.
Absolutely. If you draft him and you get 60 innings and 20 saves out of him at the current draft price, it is right. a big hit. I think the big question is, how can a reliever that you draft late hurt you? Because it's a late round draft pick, right? And typically these late round draft picks don't last that long on your roster. So a late round reliever really hurts you if there's some kind of opportunity cost that you missed, or if you play them and they really hurt your ratios. And for the opportunity costs, tough to say, but for ratios, I don't know. It's always a luck game, but Miller's, with his stuff, it doesn't seem like he has a higher than average risk of just blowing up, but you never know with relievers. Sometimes we're working on 10, 20 inning sample sizes when we're trying to make decisions, and it's just really tough. I think we have time for one more sleeper before we move on to the more negative side. So let's keep things positive for just a little bit longer. Rick, throw out one more name for us before we move on.
I'll stay. We'll keep with the injury theme here. And I'm going to throw out Pete Fairbanks, who's, this isn't exactly a sleeper who you can find late in drafts, but where he's being drafted, I do think he's just too low compared to, you know, some other guys. So, you know, in the past, the big stigma with the Rays bullpen is that they, you know, they don't use one set closer. That changed last year. Fairbanks, when healthy, was the guy. And I know it was only 45 innings, but, you know, he was their closer the whole year when he was healthy. Finished in the top 10 amongst all relievers, xRoba, PCRA, K percentage, CSW, PLV. And even, you know, 45 innings, and he's never reached 50 innings. That's the big knock on him. I totally understand if you are afraid of that and you don't want to take the chance, but 45 innings this past season. I mean, Devin Williams, Jordan Romano, Josh Hader, Rafael Iglesias had under 60 innings last year. They all finished in the top 10 in saves. They all had 30 innings. So, I mean, I threw kind of where I think there's an argument to be made that Fairbanks is a top 3 or 4 closer. You know, 45 picks after Josh Hader, 35 picks after after Camilo Doval, Rafael Iglesias, David Bednar, 20 picks after Alexis Diaz, Jordan Romano. I'd much rather Fairbanks at where he's being taken and hope that we finally, if he even gets 50 to 55 innings, I think you're making that's a huge pick right there. Then, because we know the stuff's great, we know strikeouts are going to be there, we know ratios are going to be there, and I'm not concerned about him not being the closer. So, it's, you know, you're banking on 50 innings or 40, at least 45 innings again, but I'm going to take I'm willing to take the chance, I think, on, you know, him giving us a 50 inning year this year.
Yeah, Pete Fairbanks going around RP13 this year. And typically with RP13, your innings where you hit profit at that pick is generally a lot higher than 50. To be talking about RP13 and your innings for profit is like 50, it seems low. But Ray's pitchers kind of have a bit of a reputation now. So, Ray, are you concerned about the injury risk, or are you also in on Fairbanks?
I'm into a point. I think my concern is actually the one that you just hit on. Like, even without injury, I think the Rays are so focused on managing their pitcher workloads that you could go through a situation where he's on the roster for, I don't know, give him a 2-week IL stint. He could be active for 24 weeks and still only throw 48 innings, right? They could absolutely baby him to that point, and maybe you'll still get the saves, but now you're starting, compared to the other guys in that RP13 tier that you're talking about, Eric, now you're starting to lose a little value relative to strikeouts and counting stats, and you've really got a lineup spot that you're keeping active for like 24 out of 26 weeks, but you're only getting literally 2 innings a week and maybe giving up a little volume to your competition that way.
Yeah, it's tough to see a situation where Fairbanks doesn't have some kind of IL stint, even if it's not injury related, if it's management related, and that does involve some risk and some work to manage your roster while he does that. So there is a little bit of extra price to pay in that sense for the potential profit you're getting out of Fairbanks. Okay, so I think that we should probably move on to Bus now. There might be 1 or 2 names that come back out at the end. We'll see if we have time at the end, because there were 1 or 2 more names that I know we wanted to talk about. But just in the interest of time, let's go ahead and move on. And now talking about the names that we don't quite like as much at their current draft price. And just like on the sleepers list, there was just 1 name that showed up on both of your bust lists, and that was Alexis Diaz. Now, I admit I was in the same boat last year. I had him on my bust list, and then sitting like July 31st at the trade deadline, he's like one of the top closers in the league, 32 saves, a 2.09 ERA. Now, August and September were not kind to him, but his end of the year numbers still ended up being pretty good. So, Ray, why are you still down on Alexis Diaz?
I think probably because August and September are most fresh in our minds, right? Is probably the short answer to that question. But really, I think, I thought it was kind of funny how his season kind of mirrored the Red season. So much excitement early on, and so much, oh my God, we're better than we thought. Oh my God, Alexis Diaz is better than we thought. And come August, suddenly, maybe we're not actually supposed to be this good quite yet. I just thought that was a funny little juxtaposition. But really, the thing about Diaz that is concerning is maybe Rick's got a better analysis of his pitch mix, but the control has always been shaky. He was kind of getting away with that for those first 4 months of the season with a ungodly strikeout rate, a 38% K rate that is, elite closer, Diaz, peak Kimbrel. Anytime you're knocking on 40%, you're doing something really right. But that went poof in the second half, down to 21. And looking at his pitch mix again, it's not kind of like we were talking about with Tanner Scott. So many of these relievers, there's not a lot of complexity in the pitch mix, right? Diaz is another fastball slider guy. It looks to me, Rick, like he completely fell in love with the slider. The slider went from being like, he was 60-40 fastball when things were going right. And then, was throwing the slider more than the fastball as things went wrong for him, which just suggests that, unlike the Tanner Scott model earlier, like whatever was working for him early on in the season was no longer working, and he was trying to figure something out, but he only has two tools in the belt. So, it's not like he could go to curtain number 3 for something else. So I am concerned that, absent something changing, that what we saw at the end of the year is where he's going to pick up from.
Yeah, I mean, last year was it was a tale of two halves with him. It was two different people almost. The first half, he was great, one of the best closers in baseball, and then second half, 5.78 xFIP, 6.5% K to walk rate, which is just pretty horrendous for a closer. The stuff never really graded out. He did lose. He lost faith in his fastball down the stretch.
Yeah.
But even his slider, I mean, and our Kyle Bland does a great job of the PLV, PLA, all those projections, and none of his pitches really grade out well. The slider, 3.67 PLA, 38% whiff rate, which is not terrible, but I don't think that's a top 70 pick, closer worthy. Our PL projections have him at 3.93 ERA, 1.20 whip this year with a 29% K rate. That's if he's getting you 30 saves, that's not bad, but I don't know about being a top 70 pick, being one of those first 10 closers off the board. The second half is, I think there's debate about if it was just him getting fatigued and wearing down. He did I think he was at 67 innings last year. So maybe that's the case. Maybe they need to get him back to closer to 60 innings, but it's a good concern no matter what. It's if the value, if the price was cheaper, I might still be interested, and maybe his first half comes back, but just the price as a top 70 pick right now, there's too much risk with him.
And so I was, like I said, I was in the same boat last year in pre-2023 preseason. I had him in all of my busts, and what I saw at that time, and maybe you two can confirm this or feel free to push back on it. I saw his fastball was used a lot like Alex Reyes, and I saw Alex Reyes, how his fastball developed over 2021. And now, just a couple years later, he's out of the league. He just got released by the Dodgers, I think. So I saw a fastball that was kind of mediocre, that was elevated, and he was doing that in the Great American Ballpark. Now, the home runs weren't really the reason why he struggled, or weren't really the only reason why Alexis Diaz struggled in the second half of 2023, but I could really see them coming if he has not changed that. And did either of you see those problems with his fastball, or was it really the pitch mix more so? And feel free, either of you, to chime in on that.
I think, yeah, part of the fastball wasn't located. I mean, he tried to work up in the zone, but he missed middle too often. And he's probably going to, he should be working up in the zone, sliders down. But yeah, his command's just not that. It's not that great. And when he misses his fastball, he's got a decent fastball, but it's 94.5 miles per hour, pretty flat. Not, it's a very hittable fastball. So that's a lot of damage was done there. But his slider too wasn't. It's not like he has a wipeout slider. In the first half, he was he was getting by with those two pitches. And getting that the strikeout rate in the first half is like, it's confusing to me because I'm not sure exactly how
neither of
he
the
got
two
to that
pitches
point.
supported. Exactly.
Yeah, right. So I'm not sure how that happened in the first half, but yeah, it's the fastball is certainly a concern, and that's for a 2-pitch closer, if you have fastball concerns, it's not a great start to rely on.
Yeah, it's interesting, Eric, to go back to your point about where you were a year ago at this time with him, because jumping back a year, just eyeballing his profile coming out of 2022, the concern was pretty simply 55% fly ball rate, Great American Ballpark. No, thank you. Right? It's kind of, I don't need to know much more about his pitch mix than that, right? But to his credit, it seems like his focus for the year and entering the year was clearly about bringing down that fly ball rate. He did that. He went from 75% in 22 to a very reasonable 39 last year. But when things were going well in the first half of last year, even putting aside the flukiness, like Rick said, of the 38% strikeout rate that doesn't appear backed up by either of his two pitches, he also only had a 4% home run per fly ball rate. So he cut the fly ball rate down to 36, but he was still a couple of home runs short of where he should have been, especially for that ballpark. And like Rick said, that corrected to like a normal level. It didn't normalize for the full season, but the second half was more normal in terms of home runs. But to your point, I think he realized he can't get by. There's peril up in the zone. He went down to the middle of the zone and tried to be more conventional about it. I think as the year went on, hitters figured out the fastball, and he did not have yet another adjustment to that.
Yeah, so definitely a decent amount of risk there, but that first half was so good that I'm not discounting the potential that there's something going on that we're not really quite capturing or that we're not able to measure yet. Because like we all recognize, we look at the individual pitches and try and look at that 38% strikeout rate, and it wasn't like a tiny sample size. I think it was 40. Yeah, so it was. There was something happening there. Yeah, he did it, but the question is repeating it.
100%. And let me ask, if I could divert us for one more minute on the topic. A point in Diaz's favor is, if not Diaz, I don't know where you turn in the Reds bullpen. I don't know where you're going to speculate for plan B here. He, because of lack of alternatives, he may have a fairly long rope. I mean, Ian Jabot did a little bit of cleaning up of Diaz's messes. They brought in both Suter and Pagan, and I don't want to either party to one of them. At least as far as a speculative save source, Suter will be fine, and in a setup role. I mean, maybe TJ Antone comes back to camp this year actually alive and healthy. I don't know, but I'm point being, I'm already down to TJ Antone, and I've I haven't. It's only because I haven't found anybody I'm excited about further up the depth chart.
Yeah, that's the one thing is there's no competition there really for, and if things get off to a shaky start, I'm sure they're not gonna switch in the early part of the season. So I think he's got a pretty long rope there to get things right. But again, maybe the Reds could maybe look to trade to add someone in the trade market.
Scott in August.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and that long leash could hurt you even more. Like as a fantasy manager, if he loses the job, then it's easy to just drop him, replace. But if he's hanging on to the job but still putting up this 5 ERA in a month, that's just more. Those are more stats that are weighing down your ratios. So a name that is I wouldn't say even more outside the box than TJ Antone, Lucas Sims. At some points over the last 5 years, he's shown flashes here and there, but definitely not in the last 2 years. Although last year ended up with a 3.1 ERA, but not in a very impressive fashion. So 3 saves, but still kind of outside shot at actually competing there. So let's move on to another name. So Rick, anybody else that you are not excited at their current ADP?
I'll go with someone who just signed a $95 million contract. Josh Hader, at his current value, I am a little worried about. And he's pretty much in a tier with, let's see, Devin Williams and Edwin Diaz. I feel like those two, I think I have them like pretty well above Hader, and it's partially because of where Hader ended up, and partially because of some underlying stuff. But 30% ground ball. I mean, I'm pretty sure Hader had the worst ground ball rate amongst like pitchers last year. Moving to a very, friendly hitters park, especially for right-handed hitters. So you got the lefty Hader in that ballpark is a little bit of a concern. Secondaries are very much still lagging behind his fastball, and his fastball is losing velocity year after year over the past 3 years. So now that he's entering his 30s, not really sure. We saw Aroldis Chapman kind of develop some secondaries in his, later on in his career. Maybe Hader can as well. K rates declined last year, but still 36.8% K rates great. Big thing too was, not a big swinging strike guy or a CSW guy from last year, 30%. And now he's switching to, Yanier Diaz is probably going to be the main catcher there, he grades out as a very negative pitch framer. For someone like, Hader, who's got high walk rates in the past, that could come back to bite him. Still allowing a lot of hard contact, especially now that he's going to be, pitching at that ballpark a lot, half his games. It's definitely a concern. I still like him. I mean, he's still going to strike out 34% of batters at least, probably more. But I do think the ratios might hike back up again to, where he was in 2021. 22 when he had some rough outings. There is concern for him to always have that 1 month where he's just getting bad luck on fly balls because of how many he lets up. So yeah, I think he got $95 million, and like a lot of people are like, well, he's getting paid that contract. There's no way he's not going to close. But if he's already gotten paid, why does he care what his role is? Like, why would he be upset if Ryan Presley takes a save from him once a week, or if they kind of do some things differently at the back end of the bullpen? I'm just, Presley was unbelievable last year, and he's now not a closer. If he's not a closer, he's the best setup man in baseball probably. So I just, there's a lot of things there that I just don't really want to take a chance on Hader at 45 or in the top 50 at all. I'd rather wait or take Diaz or Devin Williams.
Yeah, lots of question marks at RP3. So you mentioned the ballpark concerns, the rising walk rate concerns, the velocity concerns, now the role concerns with Ryan Presley. One maybe silver lining there is one of Hader's most valuable seasons was 2018, where he didn't really have a defined role. Only 12 saves, but that freed him up to do these really valuable 2-inning roles where he could go 2 innings, hitless, 5 Ks. And even without saves, that plays in pretty much every fantasy league. So, Ray, are you buying into that at all, or are you more on the side of all of the different risk factors that we mentioned?
I think it's hard to dispute that the overall trend arrow is pointing down, right? I think time will tell, like Rick said, whether Hader can adjust and whether it's whether he's entering a gentle decline phase or can pull the Aroldis Chapman and get deep into his 30s with making the most out of his stuff, even as he no longer pops the radar gun the way he did in his 20s. It is very interesting to think about how the Astros are going to use this 3-headed monster, especially because you think about Hader last year pretty famously was refusing to go more than 3 outs. And that was because of fear of injury, supposedly, and not wanting to jeopardize his free agent status. To your point, Eric, he got paid now. So, they want to make him a $95 million opener. He should be like, yep, fine, good ball, whatever. I don't care. You tell me, boss, you signed a paycheck. You tell me when you want to pitch. I mean, Or did they assure him, oh, yeah, we're paying you $95 million because we only want you to handle the ninth inning. We have Presley and Abreu for the seventh and the eighth. And is it a paint by number bullpen? Again, we'll probably get some information about that in March, but I can tell you how I would respond if somebody gave me $95 million. But Josh Hader may be looking at this from a different perspective. Hey, Rick, if I could put you on the spot, how far down the RP list would you have to get before you took Hader? Right, it sounds like he's out of the Dev and Diaz and Duran tier, but like you get down to like Duvall and Rizal, like is that about where you'd think about taking Hader over those guys, or do you have to go even further?
I would have him anywhere between probably between like 3 and 8, and that's in that kind of mix.
Okay,
not too far, but again, I think I'd probably just rather not if I miss Diaz and Devin Williams, who I might not even target anyway. That might be still to have a higher of a price. I might fall back to the Tanner Scott, Pete Fairbanks area and try to get 2 of those guys instead, because it's just Hader. I forgot to bring up that he kind of took himself out of games last year and only ended up with 56 innings pitched, and I don't believe he had an IL stint last year. I might be wrong on that, but if you 56 innings but he still was productive. It's still 33 saves, still a 1.28 ERA. But yeah, it's just it's always concerns me when just him getting paid now. It's like what's going to happen in a new situation, a new stadium, new team. What if things don't start off right? That can sometimes snowball. And there's just I typically stay away from guys who sign, especially closers who are signing a big contract with another team. It's worked out in the past with some guys, like Iglesias was really good with the Angels his first year. But other guys, it's not worked out. So I'd just rather stay away from him. But if he does fall, if there's a league I'm in where he's, slipping past like 5 or 6 closers, I'd probably take a chance, just because we obviously know the upside is, it's up there with anyone else really. So it just depends on where he lands, where he ends up going.
Yeah, so definitely some big questions around role there, and I think Brian Abreu's name was mentioned. If they do use him if they do use Hader in the ninth, they make Ryan Presley the best 8th inning guy in baseball, and then Brian Abreu probably becomes the best 7th inning guy in baseball.
100%.
So definitely a lot of different ways that they could play that, and I know I've seen reports where they have explicitly come out and said that they're not naming a closer right now, and I doubt they will. I think they're going to keep it pretty close to their chest until usage actually shows what their game plan is. I think we have time for one more bust. So Ray, how about a name from you? Anybody else that you're not too keen on?
Oh, let's stick with the aging fireballer theme and talk a little bit about Craig Kimbrell. We joked about Alexis Diaz and why I didn't like him. It was because of the way he ended the year in August and September. And I think any conversation about Kimbrell has to start with how he ended the year in the playoffs. And it's not so much just about October, but it's really about that was really a manifestation of a longer second half decline that even goes back further and mirrors sort of the late career skills decay that we've got going on here. Kimbrell was outwardly pretty good in the second half of last year with a 2.83 ERA and 11 saves, but strikeout rate had fallen from 40%, which is kind of that magical closer number we were talking about in the first half, down to 28 in the second. And he was really only getting away with that decreased strikeout rate and, of course, K-minus BB that comes with that, because of a 23% hit rate and 81% strand rate that was kind of papering over the problems, which unfortunately for Phillies fans came home to roost at kind of the worst time in October. But 36 with declining velocity, and we know, through his recent stops, this decade, I guess, going back to there was the 1 year with the Cubs where the mechanics were famously out of whack for like 4 out of 6 months. It's an analogy I use a lot, but to me, Kimbrell is the ultimate, high maintenance sports car that like always has something wrong with it and is in the shop. And it's not, it's not an injury in that case usually, but it's usually like, the spark plugs aren't clean or something. And he's just never, the engine just never sounds right. Right. I feel like that's the phase of Kimbrel's career we've gotten to. And, when everything's right and the sun's out and, and he just got the oil changed, maybe he'll look good for a month on end this year, but I can't get behind it for a 6-month season. I feel like it's just going to be a really stress-inducing draft pick that I don't want to make.
Yeah, he like you mentioned, since the Cubs stint over the last 5 years, he's kind of lost it and found it again, and lost it and found it again, and eventually he's gonna lose it and never find it again. And who's gonna be stuck holding the bag when that happens? So, Rick, are you worried that this year is that year?
I'm actually kind of on the other side of this. I do kind of like a little bit of a bounce back from Kimbrel this year. And not that last year was even bad. The playoffs are definitely, the playoffs were, going to leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. So, sorry, Phillies fans, but as Red Sox fans, I mean, we've seen how Kimbrel, manages Octobers. It's very, it's can be a little sketchy. So,
you're right. What am I doing referencing the Cub year when I reference the Red Sox time?
His last October in Boston. But I think the thing with him is he's obviously up there in age. I think you can't push him over 60 innings, and I think last year showed that 55 to 60 innings is plenty enough to get good value out of closers. So I think if the Orioles are smart here and don't, 69 innings was probably just too much for him last year. So if they keep him more, towards 60 innings, I think he can stay productive throughout the whole season. He's going from one of the worst pitch framers in baseball, JT Realmuto, which surprised me, but going to one of the best pitch framers in Adley Rutschman, one of the more friendly hitter ballparks in Philly to the most friendly pitcher ballpark possibly in Baltimore now, with the left field fence moved back. The fastball, curveball, constant K rate last year. The metrics, PLA still grades them out as both positive pitches. And I think he's like in that 105. He's like 15 spots after Fairbanks in that group. I think I'd rather probably spend up for Tanner Scott or Fairbanks, but I don't really hate taking a chance on him because there's still upside in Kimbrel despite his age. I mean, he showed it with the 34% K rate and still a 3.26 ERA last year, and his projections. I mean, our projections have him at 3.31 ERA, 1.08 WHIP at a 31.3% K rate. Which, if that's what he ends up doing next year and 30-ish saves, then that's I think there's some good value there where he's being taken.
Are either of you worried about Yennier Cano at all?
I mean, he got off to that really, really good start, and then it really faded after after May. He was kind of a different pitcher. Guys figured him out. I think he's still a good pitcher. I don't, the lack of swing and miss ability makes me, I don't. He's not a closer. He's a good, setup guy who can get you out of a jam with a sinker or a changeup to get a ground ball, double play, something like, he's not a closer. So I don't think he's too much of a threat unless Kimbrel does get off to a bad start. I think DL Hall might be a bigger threat if he ends up in a relief role. I think that might be the real threat here.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's a threat in the sense that I think the outcome of this job is entirely on Kimbrel and Kimbrel alone. Kimbrel will either succeed or fail. And yes, if Kimbrel fails or gets hurt, we can talk about Cano versus DL Hall and that, but no one's taking this job from Kimbrel unless Kimbrel gives it up.
Sure. All right, so we've started to have a little bit of disagreement, but in the last 10 minutes or so that we have here, there was one name who was on, I believe it was Rick's sleeper list and then Ray's bust list. So this is probably the guy that y'all will disagree on the most, and that's Ryan Helsley. So let's start out with the positive first. Let's always try and put the positive first. Now, so Rick, why are you in on Ryan Helsley this year?
Yeah, I did. If you asked me this on September 1st of last year, I would have been like, no, I'm totally out on him. No chance I'm drafting him at all next year. And then he came back in September, and I thought he was going to pitch, every other day, or just, they were going to baby him kind of and just like have him, pitch here and there. But no, he came back. He was their full-time closer, closed, all 7 of the Cardinals saves after September 4th. Was working on back-to-back days after missing such a long period of time. The velocity was back up to the upper 90s, touching 100. So yeah, he's another one of these guys. It's obviously an injury concern is a big issue. He only had 36.2 innings last year, but that did come with a 35.6% K rate, 17.5% swinging strike, 5.32 PLV, which was good for top 10 amongst all pitchers last year. Velo's still there. I mean, he had 64 innings in 2022, so he's not like Fairbanks where he's never gotten to that point. He just did it 2 years ago. So again, if just 55 to 60 innings, I think that's all we really need from him to, give us value at where he's being drafted, which is in that same, just like with Fairbanks, he's still going 20 picks after Alexis Diaz. So I'm very much, I'd rather Helsley than Diaz, or even probably Duvall or Jordan Romano. I think the Cardinals should be better this year too. I don't really, team context doesn't really mean too much for closers technically, but I do think the Cardinals would be better this year. And as long as Helsley's healthy, I think there's huge value. He's projected to have a 3.28 ERA, 1.09 WHIP, 31.1% K rate, which again, 20 picks after Alexis Diaz. I'm all in.
My concerns are pretty much just twofold. Obviously, the health, and I guess the health creates a chicken or egg problem with the other problem, which is his walk rate, which has just been, quite honestly, just off the charts bad for most of his big league career. Even last year, even when he came back, he was in that September stretch, he was still walking, let's say in September, a 16% walk rate, which is just terrifying. It was better in 2022, but that was kind of the only time. It's
an outlier. Yeah.
It's an outlier from his career. His career walk rates going back to 2019 are 8, 15, 13, 8, 12. I mean, that's just too high. And I think that, that does intertwine with the health, and maybe, the mythical fully healthy year would bring that number back down. And if he's healthy and could keep it under 10%, sure, it's interesting. It just seems like, to piggyback on your last point, Rick, that betting on that combination of health and feeding the good control compared to that Duvall and Iglesias tier, I'll take those other guys.
Yeah, so I think in regards to walk rate, it's interesting. 5 years ago, I used to be looking at 10% as that number for a closer, as like that's the number that I start to get concerned. But as strikeouts went up, I recognized that the capacity for people to absorb walks was also higher. So do you think that if the velocity is there, if the strikeouts are there, that 30+% strikeout rate, that he could absorb another 10-11% walk rate season and be okay? Like, what number are you looking at that is like, at this walk rate, he starts to be a little dicey, and under this walk rate, he's good to go?
You make a good point about him essentially being able to like fireball his way out of trouble with the massive K rate, right? But I think anything north of 10 still worries me in terms of walks, in the sense that now you worry about sequencing problems, and maybe a couple of those walks come and he just comes back with 3 strikeouts and strains the tying run on third, and everyone forgets about the walk, right? Then there's the other night where the 2 walks are followed by the 3-run homer, and then the next save off goes to Giovanni Gallegos, and it's a very different conversation, right? I think I think you just run, if you're walking guys north of 10%, you're going to have to time the strikeouts extremely well and avoid the random blue Texas leaguer or the guy who just runs into the fastball and deposits it on the other side of the fence, and now the media is asking the manager about your job.
Yeah, Walks do add a lot of risk and volatility, right? So the strikeout still counts as the one out. Yeah, Rick, you wanted to say something?
I was gonna say, yeah, like I used to be the 10% was kind of like a cutoff, or like it was the number for me too. But I like you said, I think the strikeouts, and he's not the highest strikeout guy. He's not, like, for example, Felix Bautista had 11% walk rate last year. Hader was over 13% for a walk rate. Devin Williams was at 12.1% for a walk rate. Those guys obviously have a little bit bigger K rates, but I think Helsley's not too. I mean, Helsley at 36% is not too far behind. Devin Williams at 37.7% for strikeout rates. So I do think there's, between the strikeout and walk rate, I think he's kind of more comparable to the Hader, Batista, or the Hader and Devin Williams got options than someone. Yeah.
I'm remembering as the conversation evolves, there wasn't a heck of a lot of time last year when both Helsley and Gallegos were healthy and on the roster, but I seem to recall that Marmol really didn't want to use them in the same games and was doing this kind of almost split closer kind of thing where the closer of the day was whichever one of them was fresh, and it didn't matter who got the last save. So, I mean, maybe that's, maybe he's thinking in terms of his most important motivation is to keep them both healthy and keep Helsley healthy in particular, and get as much value as he can out of that 50-55 innings, knowing that, that's going to mean not a lot of back-to-backs and, and a fair amount of downtime where he's going to have to go to plan B.
Yeah, I think, I think he got all the saves in September, and I think Gallegos was still healthy. Jojo Romero was hurt, and he was filling in, before Helsley came back. And Romero did a pretty good job. He's a good reliever himself. I mean, that's a pretty good trio they have there. But yeah, it could be where they don't need to overuse either any one of those three. But they can, kind of say, they don't want Helsley to work back to backs early in the season. Sure, but that could hurt his value a little bit. But if it keeps him fresh for September, then I'm all for it.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah, so definitely some usage concerns here, but then it probably just goes back to the magic number of K minus BB percentage, right? If he does have a higher walk rate, does he have that electric stuff and push the K rate high enough to balance it out? If not, it's probably not a great year for him. But if he does, he can even absorb maybe that 11-12% walk rate. We'll see. So we've just got a couple of minutes left here. I think we have enough time for each of you to, I think we talked about other more deeper sleepers or deeper busts. I think we have enough time for each of you to throw out one more name that you kind of wished we had more time to talk about. So let me go to Ray first. Has one more name that you wish we had more time to talk about?
My favorite, like round 45 and deeper sleeper this year is Trevor Megill with the Brewers. Obviously Dev Williams is entrenched in a role, but we don't know what's going to happen with whether he stays there all year. I think the knee-jerk reaction would be that Abner Uribe is next in line. I'm not so sure. Megill was really, really good in the second half last year. Pull up a random video on, I actually did this when we were writing the Baseball Forecaster in October. Pull up a random video on Savant of Megill punching somebody out in like September. He very much looks the part, and seemed like that he finally figured out the command that came out as BB in the second half last year. He was, small sample size, 20 innings in the second half, but 6% walk rate, 39% strikeout rate. That compares favorably with a lot of guys we've been talking about for the last hour. He's number 3 in a otherwise nondescript pen that's headlined by a premier closer, but stranger things have happened than to find himself way up the pecking order come midseason.
Yep, and the Brewers have been an absolute reliever machine the past few years. I mean, we mentioned Abner Uribe. I mean, a few years ago it was Devin Williams. I mean, they got the best season of Joel Payamp's career.
Right.
They got Elvis Peguero comes up and does great. I mean, they just seem to churn out great. Yeah, Milner. They just seem to churn out great performances from relievers. So betting on a Brewers reliever is not a bad idea. Rick, how about one last name from you?
Yeah, just I mean, I love the McGill call out. He's like Ray was saying. I mean, he's 6'8". He's like Felix Bautista size, 6'8", 250. Throws 99. Huge K rate numbers. Yeah, I think throws. I think he's the guy if Devin Williams does get traded. I think he's probably would be my favorite to close out games. Someone who's going late, he's ADP has kind of been ticking up though lately, is Gregory Santos for the White Sox, just because I don't know where else they're going to turn to for saves. They did just sign John Brebbia. I think that's another sleeper, so I might put Santos and Brebbia in the same kind of category here. Whichever one you can get for basically nothing might be worth taking a flyer on. But Santos, he finally got the closer job in September, and he struggled. He was not great. Ended up missing time. Then you think September he got put on the IL with an elbow injury. Obviously, nothing's not the best way to end the year. But if he's healthy, he did not huge strikeout rates, 22.8% K rate last year, but he was really good at limiting hard contact, dynamic hard hit rate at 4.6%. Very impressive 5.29 PLV. The fastball slider combo is much better than the 22.8% K rate shows. I think, I don't know if he taps into more strikeouts or if he's just going to kind of be a ground ball, kind of like a Brusdar Gratterall, hard throwing sinker baller with the slider that keeps hitters off balance. But I still think that there's a guy here who's not going to crush your ratios. And, if the strikeout rate, even where he's being drafted, I'm not too worried about the strikeout rate. If he's helping ratios and, getting saves, then I'll be happy with taking him, late in drafts.
Yeah. Ray, any word on Santos or Brebbia?
I would lean towards Santos if he gets through March healthy. Although
right.
I do think Brebbia is a threat, but on bad teams, we talked about it with Mason Miller earlier. But on bad teams, I'll pay close attention to who Plan A is, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time once we establish who Plan A is. I'm not going to worry too much about Plan B and Plan C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, White Sox might not be the best situation for a closer this year anyway, so maybe not a huge amount of upside, but hey, it could be 25 saves that don't kill your ratios.
There's only 30 of those jobs, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. All right, so we're about out of time. So I did want to give you both a bit of a chance to do some plugs. So Rick, where can we see or read or hear more from you?
Yeah, you can find my work on pitcherlist.com. I'm working on my early initial rankings, which should be out, when we launch in a couple weeks. So, and you can find me on Twitter at I am Rick Graham as well for, anything I post, anything I write, I'll be posting on there as well.
Great. Ray?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at RayHQ. You can find me over at Baseball HQ. When Nick was on at the top of the hour, he was good enough to drop a plug for First Pitch Florida. So I'll reiterate that. That's coming up February 29th to March 3rd. I'm flying the 29th, so I'm doing the dates wrong. March 1st to 3rd in Tampa. We're going to be down there. We'll check out a couple of spring training games. We're doing weekend-long symposium, fantasy conferences, strategy sessions. We'll have some drafts. It's a great weekend. Our current promotional rate runs through the end of next weekend, so it's a good time to jump in and book your event and grab a flight right after that. Nothing like March sun in Florida.